Hello, hello. Thank you all for coming. Before we get started, I just wanted to announce that we're going to take Q&A afterwards, and please wait for the mic before you ask your question. My name is Brian Gillis. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Art and also the director of our Center for Art Research, what we call CFAR. It is my pleasure to introduce Julie Rodrigues Widholm as the University of Oregon's 2019 Connective Conversation Curator and Critic Tour Lecturer. Before we start, I'd like to take a moment to recognize that this land that this building is on and the places and spaces that the university has used to live and work in is the occupied territory of the Kalapuya people. With tonight's gathering and the work we do here daily, we acknowledge our occupation and pay respect to the Kalapuya people and Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde as the past, present, and future stewards of this land. Since beginning my work with CFAR, I've had the privilege of shadowing my UO colleague Kate Wogley in her role as the managing partner for the Ford Family Foundation's Connective Conversation Curator and Critics tours and lectures, and I've had a chance to see how truly special this program is. As many of you know, Connective Conversations began 10 years ago as a collaboration between the Ford Family Foundation and the University of Oregon. The program brings curators and critics from outside the Northwest to conduct studio visits with Oregon artists, to deliver some form of public programming like this lecture, and join in community conversations. Connective Conversations is a key element of the Ford Family Foundation's Visual Arts program, which honors the interest in the visual arts by the late Haley Ford, a co-founder of the foundation. Connective Conversations addresses a principal goal of the Ford Family Foundation, that of improving Oregon's visual arts ecology by making strategic investments in Oregon's artists and visual arts institutions. We are grateful for the generous leadership of Kate Wogley and Candace Brewer-Nunn, a senior advisor to the Ford Family Foundation's Visual Arts Program, for initiating, sustaining, and expanding the program to include Reed College's Cooley Art Gallery, the Pacific Northwest College of Art, PNCA, Portland State University's School of Art and Design, and the now shuttered Oregon College of Art and Craft. In addition to Candace and Kate, I also want to acknowledge and thank the people who represent our partner institutions and who together have brought the state of Oregon such an exceptional group of visionary critics, curators, and arts writers. Thank you to Stephanie Snyder, director and curator of the Cooley Gallery at Reed, Mac McFarland, the director of the Center for Contemporary Art and Culture at PNCA, Pat Boaz, professor of art practice and mixed media in Portland State University's School of Art and Design, and Megan Atiyeh, formerly of the Oregon Arts Commission and now visual arts program advisor to the Ford Family Foundation. I'd also like to give a big thanks to Channing Santiago, the curator and critic tour program coordinator, and Wendy Heldman, CFAR's program coordinator, for their essential help with logistics. Additionally, I'd like to acknowledge the contributions made by my colleagues in the Department of Art and the unyielding support of our department head, Amanda Wojcik, school director, Charlene Liu, and Dean of College of Design, Laura Vandenberg. The opportunities to invite someone here through programs like the Curator and Critics Tour are truly invaluable, as these occasions are a chance for us to take stock of who we are and what our priorities may be, what currents in the world relate to the work we do, and what issues need further consideration. Julie Rodrigues Widholm's work has a fundamental relationship to the collective goals of our community, and at this time feels crucial to the work we are doing in navigating matters related to power, fraught regional histories, institutionalized structures of bias, and issues of identity, equity, and inclusion. And we are so grateful that she accepted our invitation to come here and contribute to this work. I feel obliged to introduce Julie through her professional record, which might describe where she went to school or her current role as the director and chief curator of the DePaul Art Museum, her previous role at her curatorial role at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the dozens of publications she's contributed to, and the more than 100 group and solo exhibitions she has organized and curated at institutions like the High Museum, Nasher Sculpture Center, and the Guggenheim. But these are all things that can easily be found online and maybe just superficially legitimizes the excellence of her status in the field or the choice we made to invite her. I'm more interested in talking about the ways that Julie has used the positions she has been in and the opportunities she has had to impact people. In an age where institutional racism and implicit bias is beginning to be acknowledged and spaces are opening up for underrepresented people, this work can seem motivated in some cases by metrics or optics that align with existing missions and in many ways present alternative forms of bias and objectification as what appears to be more access and agency ultimately uses people's work and identity to privilege the institution, creating the illusion of inclusion to solidify or perpetuate an institution's market share. Julie's work counters this narrative, and in doing so elevates artists, institutions, and communities alike. The degree to which she has promoted underrepresented artists and created spaces for marginalized practices, voices, and experiences for the benefit of all involved is exemplary. The contributions she has made as an intellectual leader and agitator of a kind of socially relevant discourse that gives actual agency to people and communities through the structure of museums and nonprofits is profound and will undoubtedly lead to lasting change. I greatly admire the responsibility Julie has assumed and the innovative ways she has brought people together and challenged assumptions about the limits of practices and institutions. And I'm so grateful to have the chance to be here today for her lecture, Expanding the Canon, a call for curatorial activism in the 21st Century Museum. Please help me welcome Julie Rodrigues Widholm.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Is this working? Can you hear me all right? The speaker's on. Thank you so much, Brian. I'm humbled by that introduction. And thank you all for inviting me to visit you. I've had a few days of studio visits, which have been inspiring and galvanizing and energizing for me. The privilege of visiting artists in their studios is really why I do what I do, and it's kind of been the impetus for my work since I began. So thank you all for welcoming me into your studios and your homes and for having really important conversations that truly inform the way I think about what I do and why I do what I do. I just want to mention that I have not given this talk before and I have 57 slides, so if you need to leave at any point, please do. I will not be offended if you need to leave before I'm done, and I also will try not to keep us here for much more than an hour and 15 minutes. Expanding the Canon. So I changed the title a little bit in between the first time I submitted it and now, because the issue of leadership is something that's come up for me in the last, well, really since I took this position 4 years ago at DePaul Art Museum. And I think it goes hand in hand with curatorial activism and expanding the canon. These are all parts of the equation. So I'm going to share some of my current thoughts and ideas and sort of passions with you today. So I begin with the fact that museums are not neutral. This is a position that has actually taken me longer than I thought to come to. When I began my career, I sort of accepted the given that museums had to be sort of objective spaces and had a certain air of authority that they conveyed to the public. I no longer think that because museums are comprised of human beings, and human beings are not objective whatsoever about anything. When I did a quick, just for fun, Google search of museum directors, these are all fantastic people, I'm sure. What came up was the white man with a bow tie and a suit coat. So I thought how appropriate that even Google is sort of underscoring the image that we have for a long time. These are the people who ran museums. And there was a book I read fairly recently about sort of museum directors talking about their experience, how they came to their positions. And when I was reading through, I was absolutely shocked how many went to the same 5 universities. And I thought, wow, we actually really have a lot of work to do to diversify who is leading our institutions. But given the fact that museums are at their root and foundation, colonially based institutions that reflected the core values of those who ran them, largely white men. And also the history of art has largely been written in a certain way that prioritizes kind of Eurocentric art history. This little poster on the left sort of infuriates me. I don't know if it infuriates anyone else, but to sort of limit the history of art to these 9 artists is completely inadequate. However, this is the dominant art history that we're taught in university. And there's also the fact that we have contemporary artists such as Jeff Koons selling their work for $91 million. And so this sort of value attached to art is usually either related to how it fits within this Western art history or its market value. The result of this is that we have museums that are completely kind of homogenized and also exclusionary, because those who were leading them and who were in power did not think that certain works by women or other groups were of quality or good. And so we end up in 1985 and also 2015 with these posters by the Guerrilla Girls, who hopefully some of you are familiar with, to sort of illustrate how poorly we are doing in terms of numbers, which I actually think really matter. I think without increasing the opportunities for artists in our communities, in our society, giving them a platform, museums will never change. So I think the resources we're giving artists, the amount of space we're giving them, the visibility that we're giving them is crucial to growing our museums and making sure that they're relevant. I mean, the numbers, again, the statistics, when the data actually shows us how horrible it really is. I mean, I think we all feel it when we walk into museums. We can see who's on the walls. But I just pulled up some stats about women artists in particular, and the stats are even worse for other particular groups. But a recent data survey of the permanent collections of 18 prominent art museums in the U.S. found that out of 10,000 artists, 87% are male and 85% are white. That's a huge number. Out of only 27 women out of 318 artists are represented in the 9th edition of Janssen's survey, Basic History of Western Art, up from 0 in the 80s, apparently. Only 13.7% of living artists represented by galleries in Europe and North America are women. 13% is a really horrible number. In a study of 820,000 exhibitions across the public and commercial sectors in 2018, only 1/3 were by women. So this is kind of the state of affairs, right? Data is important, and it's good to know that these numbers are out there for us to consider. So the forces, I mean, I'm not going to go into kind of the forces of white male patriarchy throughout the history of time. But as we hopefully understand, there are forces that play in structural systems related to colonization, politics, globalization. There are forces that create exclusionary practices and systems. So I now operate from the position that museums are not neutral. There are a lot of systemic forces that have created this and continue to perpetuate this through our museums. And if we don't consciously and intentionally change the way we're working, nothing will change. So I talk today to you with some kind of personal ideas and experiences from my 20-year career that I feel will help shape the museum landscape and what we can do. First, know yourself personally and institutionally. So there is a sense that museums as institutions don't take sides or positions. However, because they are run by people who have personal perspectives and values, those people's personal perspectives and values shape the institution. It's a given. They're not run by machines. So, museums are run by people. So I think it's actually quite important that we all know ourselves personally and institutionally. So I will share with you a little bit of who I am that informs the work that I do. So I am an Army brat. My dad was in the Army for 20 years. I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana for undergrad, School of the Art Institute for graduate school. I'm a white cis woman in a heterosexual relationship. I have 2 children, a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. I have a dog. I'm an Aries. I'm an 80s kid. I grew up MTV generation. Ethnically, I have Portuguese and Mexican roots, along with Scottish and Canadian, and I'm an American citizen. These are just some categories that sort of inform who we are. But as a curator and a person in the world who has also moved 11 times as a child all over the world in different countries. I lived in Brazil, Mozambique, Portugal, Germany. I've lived in Kansas, Georgia, North Carolina, New York, California. This inevitably has informed my worldview and what I believe is important in art and the experiences that I think merit a platform. It also informs my understanding of a kind of essential humanity that we all share. I recently attended the Getty Leadership Institute at Claremont Graduate University, and this is for art museum leaders from around the world to attend a sort of intensive 4-week online program, 2-week residence program, to really spend time on your personal leadership development as well as a strategic challenge for the institution. And here, we went through a lot. I kind of jokingly say that the Getty Leadership Institute is like a crash course MBA for art museum professionals and group therapy for 2 weeks, because there's a lot of reflection and sharing and creating a kind of vulnerability with your peers that allows you to understand kind of why we're doing what we're doing, and understand that everyone's unique style of leadership is their own, right? There's not one model of leadership. We all bring leadership to a situation that reflects who we are. So this is just a sort of list of, as a leader, as a museum leader, the things that we were dealing with. I learned in terms of the strengths-based assessments that one can take in these situations. Have you ever taken the Gallup Poll Strengths Finder assessment? Anyway, yeah. So if you're familiar with it, my 5 strengths are achiever, strategic, belief, futuristic, and connectedness, which once I learned those terms in relationship to my strengths, it made all the sense in the world. I'm often thinking about making an impact 50 years from now, thinking about the future of art history, thinking about how what we collect now impacts the future, how the scholarship we write now impacts the future. And I also like to get things done. So in terms of the term curatorial activism, this is a term that came to me recently also, and I have to credit Maura Riley for this term. She wrote a great article about it online, and then has since published a book. And I think I've been doing this all along, but I didn't know this is what I was doing. So as a curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art, kind of an emerging curator, I was very focused on working with women artists. I was always trying to look at kind of the margins of the art world and see who wasn't really being given a platform, who I thought deserved a platform. But this is a really great book if you're interested in learning more about kind of Maura Riley's take on this. So that's kind of me personally as a leader. Institutionally, I'm now Director and Chief Curator of DePaul Art Museum, which is the country's largest Catholic university. We have about 22,000 students. We're located in Chicago in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. We're right next to the Fullerton L station. And we are founded on the teachings of St. Vincent de Paul, who's the patron saint of organized charity. And that sort of service ethos permeates all of the university. And there's something that the administration and mission and values department on campus likes to share, which is St. Vincent de Paul's question of what must be done. So in thinking about this in a museum context, which is ironically kind of something I've always asked myself, like what needs to be done here in terms of shaping museum programs or reshaping them. We are situated in this sort of Venn diagram at the center of the local and the global, social justice and artistic innovation. But the backdrop is modern and contemporary art and also lifelong learning. So we try to be clear about who we are and what we're doing to ourselves, but also to our public. We serve both campus communities, but also the broader Chicago community as well. In doing so, we have our kind of mission statement, our vision statement, and our teaching vision on our website. We also have a collecting vision on the website. And for me, this kind of, it not only does it keep us honest, right? It keeps us accountable to what we say we're doing by putting it out there to the public. But in our mission statement that we rewrote when I first arrived 4 years ago, I thought it was really important to put in some language about us being a museum that is an inclusive space for art and ideas to connect people. I think museums traditionally are spaces for objects, right? They're about preserving objects for the future, for posterity, and I think it's very easy for objects to become more important than people in museums, and really the whole point is for us to connect through art. This is all on our website, so I'm not going to go through each one. At DePaul Art Museum, we believe everyone has a voice. We're not giving anyone a voice. Everyone has a voice already. We're simply providing a platform to amplify their voice, experience, and perspective to contribute to culture and make space for ways of being and making that may exist outside the art market. That doesn't mean we don't show any market artists, because we might. For us, it's a question of what is relevant to our communities within Chicago, what feels urgent to our program, but also making sure that we're not only looking at art fairs to find artists. Okay, so I'm calling this humanitarian museum leadership because I feel, and this may be related to leadership in general. I've never worked for a corporation, so I can't compare. I've only worked in nonprofits and I've only worked in museums. But I feel that there is a sort of crisis in museums internally, and that a lot of people who come in so passionate about this work very quickly get burnt out. And it's for a variety of reasons, and I'm wondering how can we change this within museums so that we're not sort of, we're not burning out the people who come in so passionate and who really care about this work, but for a variety of reasons leave the field. So these are sort of the things I think in an ideal scenario a museum would do to, again, recognize that our biggest resource in museums are the people who work there. So first, of course, pay people fairly. And I'm just going through a list of these several things fairly quickly. Pay people fairly. The prestige of working in an art museum doesn't pay anyone's bills. So it's quite important that people are paid fairly. I'll quote Brené Brown here. I think clarity is kind and vulnerability is strength. So I've seen many museum leaders, who feel that there's a need to act a very strong part and not acknowledge that they may not know some things and that maybe they can rely on their staff to help them figure something out. I also think ambiguity and sort of hazy roles and responsibilities is a problem in museums as well. So something that I am really, really quite passionate about now is the fact that I believe leadership and management and coaching training at all levels is lacking in museums and must be established and valued. So any one person who manages another person must have some management training. These are people's lives in our hands, and to create a culture of mentorship and growth and accountability and responsibility and productivity is not something that you learn when you're getting a PhD in art history. It's not something you're learning if you're getting a degree in accounting. It's really something that you have to specify as an important part of running an institution. So I think for me, this is key to actually train your staff at all levels how to manage people better and responsibly and give feedback and all of that. I think we have to engage our staff with diversity, equity, access and inclusion training and also anti-racism training. It's very easy to find organizations now that will do this for staff. I also think, as I mentioned, we need to prioritize people over objects and money. Allowing everyone to bring their full selves to work, as a working mother in the arts, it has been difficult to, sort of the art world believes it's art over everything. And really it can dehumanize someone if you're not able to bring all aspects of yourself to work. So I'm glad to see that that's starting to change, but I think the art world is actually a little bit behind corporate America in acknowledging that. Also recognizing that everyone deserves a personal life, whether you're training for a marathon, have a pet, sick family member, want to do bonsai in your free time, whatever it is, people deserve a personal life. And we need to acknowledge that too. We're not superhuman machines within institutions, and that rest and self-care are actually necessary elements to productivity. And I think this is quite important, is to allow for learning and growth. So at all levels, as an educational sort of institution that museums are, right, we're educating others, I think we need to be transparent about how we're educating ourselves as well. I'm very open with my staff about how I'm, kind of working on my leadership development, and I share the tools and books and readings with them, and hope also to help them develop in their leadership. But also, learning and growth means you might fail, you might get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay too. I think institutions, specifically museums, can be extremely hierarchical, and I think there must be some way to allow for staff input and buy-in to really shape these organizations, to better reflect their communities, because you can't just have 5 people sort of at the top making all the decisions. And to focus on quality over quantity. This is one that it's a mantra I'm trying to internalize because it is not my nature. I'm kind of a type A achiever, and I love to get sort of opportunities for a lot of artists, as many as possible, and bring them into the program. But that's not realizing the capacity of your staff, and it's important to realize that, again, we can only do so much, and so let's focus on what's important, and let's focus on quality over quantity. In terms of curatorial activism, so there's no definition for curatorial activism. It's a fairly new term, but I think if one is inclined to be curatorially activist, these are some things that I suggest that we all consider doing to change how museums are currently practicing curatorial work. So one is embrace the local. Embrace the local, or also, as I am, go to Oregon. Like, get outside of Chicago. I do studio visits all over the country, and I received an invitation to go to Arkansas recently, and I've never been to Arkansas, so I thought, fantastic, I want to go to Arkansas and see what's happening there too. But often it's easy for institutions to sort of ignore what's happening locally and prioritize what's happening elsewhere. So I highly suggest that museums pay attention to what's happening locally. Just an example, at the MCA in Chicago, for 10 years, we had an exhibition series called 12 by 12, which was a solo show for very emerging artists, one a month, all year for 10 years. And this is where we kind of identified a gap in the community. It felt like there weren't enough spaces for emerging artists to show. And so the director at that time, Bob Fitzpatrick, decided that this would be a generous offering for the community. And as a young curator, it gave me a reason to go out to the community and do studio visits and kind of bring artists who were just starting their careers into the space. It was very experimental, flexible. There was room for failure. It was really kind of wonderful. Actually, at the bottom, the sort of light, that's Julia Oldham, who now lives here in Eugene. And it's been kind of exciting to see where all of these artists go. I will say I don't recommend solo shows, one a month all year. It's very fast. And audiences don't have enough time to see it. It's way too fast-paced. But I'm pretty proud of the fact that we gave, however many, 360 artist shows over 10 years. After 2011, the MCA slowed it down and had 3 bigger shows with a small brochure publication because we felt like that was more meaningful for the artists. Colleen Smith is another example of an artist who was doing research in Chicago, hadn't lived there very long, but I was really interested in the work she was doing around Sun Ra. And, she didn't have a gallery, but I thought the work was so compelling and so related to Chicago's history and music history that it would be exciting to invite her to do a project. So this is just an example of sort of, again, looking at who's working right around you. And she had a performance on the bottom left with the Rich South Marching Band performing Sun Ra music in the museum. Another point I think is important is don't be afraid to go first. There's a sort of fear of not being in consensus in the art world. And I think we need to get, sort of put that aside and really not be afraid to go first. Someone's got to go first, right? Someone's got to believe in an artist and give them an opportunity. And I'm just giving you sort of random examples from the curatorial programs I've worked on. But Barbara Jones-Hogu was an Afro-Cobra artist from the south side of Chicago, working primarily in the late 60s and early 70s. And when it was the Wall of Respect's 50th anniversary in 2018, I started looking into the women who had been working on the Wall of Respect on the south side of Chicago, and Barbara was one of them. And by looking into her materials and reading her CV, I noticed that she had never had a solo museum exhibition in her life. So at this point, she was probably in her mid to late 60s, and I thought, well, this is crazy that she's never had a solo exhibition. So we got to work on it and got a grant from the Terra Foundation to publish a catalog, her first monograph, to really document her work, her role within the Afro-Cobra movement. And very sadly, she passed away 2 months before the opening. But I'm really glad that we, put the kind of minimal resources we have toward this project. And then her work has been part of the Soul of a Nation exhibition that's been touring all over the world. I think it's in San Francisco right now at the De Young. And our book is being sold, at the different venues where that exhibition is. So even though, some of the work may seem to not have a national impact when you're doing it, it can. It can sort of grow and accumulate the work you're doing. Another example is that we had some Bob Ross paintings in our spring exhibition, and we were the first art museum in the country to show Bob Ross paintings, which really surprised me. I couldn't believe no one else had done that yet. I thought, what? It's Bob Ross. How could that be? And it started with my own curiosity about, where would I see a Bob Ross? What if I wanted to see one? And we just contacted Bob Ross Inc., and I folded him into a group exhibition called New Age Strategies for Survival. Some of my painter friends gave me grief. They were like, Julie, Bob Ross is not a good painter. And I said, well, let's talk about quality. What makes him a bad painter? Why? And for me, it was the fact that he's this culturally significant figure. He absolutely resonates with multiple generations. And I thought, he's absolutely going to be included in my show. And then after that, you may have heard about other, museums have been giving him shows, but we were the first. Okay, another question I always ask is whose stories are not being told in art museums? How can we give a platform to a wider range, I've already sort of said this, ways of being and making in order to be relevant to the communities we serve? The work that I do is in Chicago, and I know that it's in Chicago, and I don't necessarily advocate for this exact kind of program working in every location. I think it's just asking these questions of yourself to see what makes the most sense for the context you're in. When I was at the MCA, I curated a performance series with Stan Schellerberger and Dutz Miller, who are artists who collaborate. They're married. And, I was feeling like I hadn't seen any work, I'm sorry, it's a little pixelated, work that was kind of addressing queer love in many ways, like just a sort of the romance, the love, the partnership. And so this is a knitted piece that they've been doing since 2003. And they perform it in various locations, wherever they're invited, and will continue to work on this knitted pink tube until they die. And then the other person, whoever's surviving, will unravel the entire thing. So that was in 2013 at the MCA, and then in 2019 I invited them to perform the same thing at DePaul Art Museum on the occasion of a weaving show that we had by an artist, KG, who was actually a good friend of theirs. So I think there's also something to be said for maintaining relationships with artists, and as you move or they move, giving them opportunities as well. Another example of kind of whose stories I wasn't seeing in museums, there's an artist, Hong No, who had been in Chicago, left for New York, came back maybe 10 years later, and was doing some really interesting work around a Vietnamese revolutionary, and was using the kind of archival research from France and from Vietnam to tell the story of this woman's life, and doing so in a way that incorporates her use of textiles and sewing, which is also part of her training. And, really looking around the landscape in Chicago anyway, I just hadn't seen anything really even about post-colonial Asia in Chicago in a while. And I thought, okay, this feels like it would be a great addition to what's happening in the conversation in Chicago right now. So that's the way I think about it. What am I not seeing, and how can I kind of fill in some gaps? Another thing I advocate for is introducing your donors or stakeholders, that may be faculty, students, whomever, your community. Introduce them to new artists. Let them meet the people that you're wanting to work with. We have a very small donor base at DPAM, but we do invite them regularly to visit with the artists that we either have on view right now or we're about to. Because then you're building familiarity, you're building community, you're kind of building that human connection with someone, again, who may not be on the cover of Art in America, but is actually someone who's doing really great work, who the museum is investing in, and therefore you start to build awareness and recognition. So these are just a couple of examples. This is Caroline Kent, who works in Chicago, and Bethany Collins. I also advocate for writing or rewriting new narratives. Some amazing opportunities I had as a younger curator was to work on the short century with Okwe and Wezor, which was one of the first surveys of contemporary African art. And we presented this at the MCA Chicago in 2001. Completely full of material that I did not learn a thing about in grad school or undergrad. It was really kind of, for me, breakthrough art history. And then I also worked on Tropicalia, a revolution in Brazilian culture, which was looking at Brazilian art from the 60s and 70s, along with some contemporary Brazilian artists. Again, work that was unfamiliar to me from my art historical training, but actually really quite important to the development of younger generations of art. Another show that I curated called Escultura Social, a new generation of art from Mexico City, took place in 2007 at the MCA. And really for me, this was an important moment to help dispel traditional notions of what Mexican art looked like. I think, at that time, I was feeling like people still considered contemporary Mexican art to be folkloric or more traditional, and wanted to share that there are actually other kinds of artists working in Mexico City, mostly from the generation from the 90s and 2000s, who were using conceptual practices, who were influenced by Western art history, and actually taught themselves Western art history. They wanted to be part of the conversation internationally. I think there's been an interesting shift since 2007, where now I feel that a lot of Mexican artists are looking back at indigenous practices and kind of embracing that more so. So it's interesting how the narrative also changes over time. Another example of a narrative I wanted to kind of attempt to rewrite was the narrative around Frida Kahlo. So I organized an exhibition at MCA called Unbound, Contemporary Art After Frida Kahlo, which allowed for Chicago, on one hand, to just see her work, because there are no Frida Kahlo paintings in public museums in Chicago. And there were two in a private collection, so I borrowed the work from the private collection to create a center point for a conversation about how prescient she was, how kind of revolutionary she was in her work in the early part of the 20th century around gender fluidity, around traumatized bodies, around the kind of embrace or rejection of nationalism, of kind of political agency and performance, but also wanted to bring it back to her painting. I think there's such a strong sense of her as this celebrity figure and a cult figure, and she's so beloved around the world. But I think that story of her and Diego has kind of overtaken her work, and so I wanted to just kind of bring it back to the work itself. And then in our program at DePaul Art Museum, whenever we can, we will try to publish a book for an artist who doesn't yet have a monograph, to contribute to the scholarship and literature around that artist. So in the last 2 years, we've published 7 books, I believe. Brendan Fernandes, Out of Easy Reach, Carolina Genatowski, Barbara Jones-Hogu, Zach Ostrowski is an artist who goes by Beverly Fresh. He's on faculty at DePaul. And then Yasuhiro Ishimoto, who was a Japanese mid-century photographer. I would say 7 books in 2 years is way too much for us, for our staff, so we're going to slow that down. But we have discovered that there are very inexpensive sort of broadsheet brochures that we can print out of New York that are like $1 a piece. And so we can print like 1,500 for $1,500. And it's still a way to get new writing out there, to document it. You know, artists usually, they want something tangible to outlast the exhibition itself. So whenever we can, we try to provide that, if nothing else already exists. If you have 10 catalogs already, too bad, so sad. We're not going to do another one. Yeah. So thinking about how to create opportunities for artists and distribute resources more equitably. So by this, I mean be thoughtful about who's getting the 10,000 square foot show and who's getting the 5,000 square foot show and who's getting the 1,000 square foot show. Because if you start looking at exhibition programs, you'll see who's getting the 10,000 square foot show, and it's usually the male artists. These are just some examples also from the MCA Chicago. Again, a much bigger budget and larger scale than I currently have at DePaul Art Museum. But nevertheless, thinking about equity within the program, there was a pop art design show on the schedule, and I really wanted to think about an artist who was working critically against or with pop art. And Catherine Andrews is an artist based in Los Angeles whose work I thought really fit the bill beautifully. So she was given 5,000 square feet and a catalog. This was part of a series called the Ascendant Artist Series, where it was often the artist's first major solo museum exhibition, and there was always a catalog to go with it. So there are a lot of resources put behind this kind of project. And this show ended up touring to the Nasher Sculpture Center in Dallas. Similarly, I like to think about how can we provide opportunities to artists that they're not getting elsewhere. And Amanda Ross Ho is an artist who had worked sort of in large-scale sculpture, but had never done an outdoor sculpture. So I thought, as we were looking for an artist to do a plaza project out front, that I thought would be really, really important to find a woman to do a project, because we rarely see kind of women looking at large-scale sculpture. And so for Amanda, who at this point, you know, was still fairly young in her career, was really given a great opportunity to have a public work that had the institutional support behind it and resources too. Doris Salcedo is another example. I co-curated this exhibition with the museum's director, Madeline Grinstein. And here, you know, Doris Salcedo's work, if you're not familiar with it, is sort of furniture, wooden furniture filled with concrete, or it's very large, heavy. Shipping this work anyway is probably prohibitive for most institutions. So the fact that the MCA really put a lot of resources behind this artist who was living and working in Colombia, I think was quite important and meaningful. And then we also published a catalog to go along with her work. Her work generally addresses issues of mourning and loss related to violence in Colombia and also violence around the world. And then an example at DePaul Art Museum, there was an artist, KG, they go by KG, who doesn't have a commercial gallery. I had been watching the work for about 10 years and was really a fan of the work. And as we were talking, I decided that I would offer them the entire museum. You know, to really see, if you give an artist a big opportunity like that, what does it allow them to do? How can they grow? How can they push themselves in their practice? And we thought originally that it would be a kind of 10-year survey, but KG felt very strongly that they wanted to make all new work. And so I said, okay, if that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do. Yeah. And I believed in the artist, and I didn't know exactly what was going to be in the show, you know, until a couple weeks before the show opened. And we had, you know, a layout. We knew how much space we needed. But yeah, that was actually invigorating, and I think meaningful for the artist, again, when an institution can put that much sort of faith and support in them. And they also got a catalog for that show. Collaboration and listening. So as a smaller institution in Chicago, kind of the newest art museum in Chicago, we are the new kid on the block, and it's really exciting for me to think about how we can tap into citywide initiatives or collaborations and kind of share resources, but also learn from some of the bigger organizations. A couple examples. The Chicago Architecture Biennial happens every 2 years, and we have been an anchor site for the last 2 years. Our current program right now, which has Julia Fish, a painter who paints details from her home, architectural details, and she curated a show from our collection of architectural drawings. So we kind of program our whole season around the Architecture Biennial to really be a partner and expand the audiences for what they're doing and what we're doing. Art Design Chicago was a whole year-long project in 2018 spearheaded by the Terra Foundation, where I think 40-plus different institutions presented exhibitions, publications, symposia, programs, really digging into the pre-1980 art history, art and design history of Chicago. And for that, we had the Barbara Jones-Hogu catalog and exhibition, and also the Yasuhiro Ishimoto. The National Veterans Art Museum Triennial took place last summer for the first time ever. And in conversation with the organizer, I was really excited about how DPAM, again, could be a partner for this, a sort of satellite venue, because I feel that, in part because I am the daughter of a military officer, how infrequently I've seen exhibitions that represent or depict a kind of soldier's view of within contemporary art. So I was excited to support that project as well. And then Art Aids America happened back in 2017, and it was at the Alphawood Galleries, which are literally just down the street from us in a temporary exhibition space that was built out by Alphawood Galleries. And for that, we asked guest curator Danny Orendorff, who was here several weeks ago, I think, to speak to y'all. We asked him to guest curate a show of kind of emerging artists of color who are addressing issues of HIV and AIDS in their work. Because the Art Aids America survey was a much more kind of homogeneous white male perspective on work from that generation, we thought it was quite important to kind of bring in a younger generation. So we had this little newspaper with contributions and writings from the artists. Again, very inexpensive to print, but really important to be able to give the artists a kind of voice and contribution to the exhibition. And this was one of the most popular shows we've had at DePaul Art Museum. I didn't really know how the content would be received at a Catholic university, and really I think it was heartwarming and gratifying to understand that this kind of work is actually at the core of what DePaul University wants to be doing. So that was really fantastic to learn. We also organized a 3-part exhibition. So it was one exhibition in 3 parts called Out of Easy Reach, which was guest curated by Allison Glenn, who's now a curator at the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas. And it was a group show of female identifying artists of the Latin and Black diasporas, specifically working in abstraction. And we had part of the show at DePaul Art Museum, part of it was at Gallery 400 at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the third part was at the Stony Island Arts Bank. So that is the project that Theaster Gates runs on the south side, which is an old bank that he's now converted into an exhibition space. It was important for us and for the guest curator, Allison, that we kind of start to traverse the geography of the city. So Chicago is a very segregated city, the north side and the south side, strongly divided. So we thought it was an exciting opportunity to think about how do we work together to bring this work and the thread kind of mapping across the city. It wasn't easy, because collaborations are never easy, but it was definitely worthwhile, and it allows us to expand our reach and kind of underscore what we're all already doing by working together. Another thing I advocate for that we do at DePaul Art Museum is to question museum traditions publicly. And by that I mean sort of conventions, traditions of museum practice. One example, we have a group of about 250 African objects in our collection. And Brennan Fernandes is a Chicago-based artist now of Kenyan Goan descent. And a lot of his work deals with how Western museums are collecting African objects and the kind of complicated narratives around all of that. We have a lot of work that doesn't have a lot of documentation or provenance. We don't know much about it. And so for me, thinking about how do I weave these 20th century objects into our modern and contemporary program without having much information about it, Brendan allowed us to really bring those questions to the public, right? So instead of hiding the fact that we don't really have a lot of information and we don't know what a lot of this is, we just raise those questions publicly. Like, how do we consider this? Is this art? Is this artifact? What do you do about authorship? What are the sort of projections that we put onto an object in a museum collection? And a lot of these questions are within Brendan's work, and so his work was interspersed. You'll see on the right, those are his photographs, but then within each, we would put masks from our collection in between them. We also had different labels for the African objects that would sort of highlight the fact that we were missing some information. And we had a little handout brochure for the object labels for Brendan's work. Another example, and this is sort of a playful thing that we just did in the last show, New Age, was to replace nationalities with astrological signs. And this was not just to be playful and funny, but actually to question the notion of insisting that an artist give you their nationality to add to this label. Because in my experience, I've had many artists ask me, like, Julie, why do you need this? My nationality, why does it matter? I was born here, I was raised here, I moved here. Like, the nationality I'm giving you doesn't tell you anything important about me. And I think that's very much a hangover, a certain way of working, like we want people to be identified by their countries or their passports. So I thought, okay, in this context, just for fun, what if we replaced one's astrological sign, which tells you just as much or little as a nationality does, perhaps, about an artist. Some artists insisted that we had their sun sign, their star sign, their rising sign. So we had to kind of deal with that as well. But it was actually quite fun. We also had one of the artists in the show created an astrological guide to the exhibition. So if you knew your sign, you could see this whole chart that would maybe give you an alternate path to go through the exhibition. And again, thinking about how are we navigating these shows when just highlighting the fact that there's no one way to do it. There are many ways to enter into it. So that was kind of fun. Thinking about the fact that small museums can have a big impact. Now that I'm in a smaller museum, I see how much ink is written about the big museums and how little is written about smaller museums, and kind of the great work that is often happening there. So I encourage everyone to pay attention to work that's being done outside of MoMA, outside the Whitney. Like, there's a lot of good stuff happening all over the country. But also to not let small budgets stop you from doing good work. I mean, I have a staff of 4 running this institution, and we are somehow able to do it. Our budget's less than $1 million a year, and it's been kind of surprising to me, like what a little DIY, like just get to work, like just do it. No excuses, just kind of do what you can and be resourceful, and good things can happen. Not to toot my own horn too much, but we do get a lot of press, and I think the press that we're getting is underscoring to me that we are being clear about what we're doing, because people are writing about what we're doing in a way that reflects what we say, what we're doing. So there's an understanding that our program is really about bringing a much wider range of human experience into the museum spaces, and also interweaving Chicago-based artists into a larger narrative. A funny thing for me was when I was in a taxi in Chicago. So, the little video screens in taxis. Someone was like, Julie, you're in the taxi. I was like, I didn't even know. That was kind of fun. Okay, so be intentional about the changes you want to see. Here, I'm referring to a new Latinx initiative that we are in the middle of kind of starting at DPAM. So for something I've observed also over my career is how few exhibitions there are and how infrequently museums are collecting US-based artists of Latin American descent. As we know, collections are largely white men, but Hispanic/Latinx artists are only 2.8% of collections. And within Chicago, it makes a lot of sense because nearly a third of our population is a Latinx population, and 16% of our enrollment. So we have 33% students of color at DePaul, and the majority of that, I think, are Latinx students. So for us, it's sort of like, okay, we see, again, a gap in what's being done, and we would like to, in the way we can, start to address this need that we see. Just kind of starting a few years ago, I've been very much thinking about, okay, whose work should we be incorporating into the exhibition program? This is just an example of Frida Baez, who was a Dominican-American artist, whose work was very much about sort of identity and hair and the depiction of Afro-Latina women. Current exhibition we have on view right now is called Remember Where You Are, and it includes 4 artists, 2 from Chicago, 2 from San Antonio. Jimmy James Canellis, Janelle Esparza, Emilio Rojas, and Melissa Leandro. And they're all addressing sort of place and heritage in relationship to identity and sense of belonging. We are also, we had an exhibition, Eric J. Garcia, The Bald Eagle's Toupee. So this was actually part of the National Veterans Art Museum Triennial, which was contemporary art made by veteran artists. And so here we were kind of folding in our work together. Eric J. Garcia is a veteran, originally from Albuquerque, and he made this site-specific mural called The Bald Eagle's Toupee. I don't know if you can sort of see, it's like Uncle Sam there, and then his arms are like reaching out. So it's sort of a personal narrative about his experience, but also the sort of promises that he, as a young Latino, who really needed a way out, or sort of a way to, he thought the only way to sort of advance in society was to join the military, get money for college, and then he became an artist. And really, for us, the Latinx Initiative is a multi-pronged, right now we're thinking of it as a 3-year initiative that will kind of create a foundation for this work long-term. It's a collection building initiative, so all of our acquisition funds for the next 3 years are going to go toward US-based Latinx artists. It's also a kind of community building, trying to bring in and become more aware of what's happening in our own community, in various Latinx communities. I mean, I'm using Latinx as an umbrella term to kind of, and I understand it's a contested term, but for us right now, it's sort of thinking about US-based artists of Latin American heritage. So it's kind of a research initiative, a curatorial initiative, thinking about curatorial exchanges. If there are some ways, if we can get funding to bring curators from other cities to come to Chicago to do studio visits, and then likewise myself and our assistant curator would go to other cities to do studio visits there and kind of expand our knowledge and understanding of who's working where and what are the concerns and conversations regionally within various Latinx communities. We also have a fellowship position at the museum for a DePaul student, and we're dedicating that student's kind of work toward researching the collection of Latin American and Latinx work that we have. And next fall, our entire museum will be dedicated to an exhibition around Latinx holdings in the collection too. So for me, thinking about not just like one-off projects or 1 or 2 or 3 exhibitions, but really more holistically, how are we going to create roots for this work long term. And then sort of in conclusion, 502, yes. In conclusion, I show you here, actually, this was also the New Age exhibition. It's a piece by Whit Forster. This gold leaf piece on the wall had a sort of, what do you call it? It was like if you touched it on the 2 sides, you would get a little shock. Like there's a therapy shock system. I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, the point was to have 2 different people touch different sides, and then if you touched your fingers, you would actually feel this charge go through your body into each other. It was one of the most popular pieces in the show. So at the opening, we thought, what if we all touched our fingers? Would we feel this charge all throughout? And we kind of did, actually, which was sort of funny. Anyway, I just love this picture. It's in some ways a cheesy representation of connecting people, but I think I'm creating a program that really is focused on people and trying to bridge this disconnect between people that seems to be growing in our society. For me, art is a space where you can foster understanding and figure out how to negotiate difference by embracing complexity, non-binary thinking, and contradiction. So I'm hopeful and optimistic and continue to be that art is the space where we can have these different conversations, difficult conversations, but also a lot of people aren't able to, kind of negotiate the unfamiliar. And so I hope that through programs that distinctly create opportunities for you to do that, that we can kind of figure out how to negotiate difference and also provide an opportunity for people to actually see themselves and consider themselves participants in the culture and provide opportunities for that too. That's it. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for laying out what vision you have for just museums and kind of programming related to the art world. I'm really curious about what opportunities and obstacles educational art museums have in general, but especially one related to the Catholic Church and all of the kind of fraught history that the Catholic Church represents related to the work that you do. And so I'm curious how you negotiate that in practice and how that informs the direction you see for the institution.
Yeah. I am very happily surprised at how much freedom I have to create a program that I think makes sense for DePaul and for the city of Chicago. I think DePaul's brand of Catholicism is perhaps unique, or they really live by their ethos of helping marginalized populations and groups. And so when I had the exhibition of, artists with HIV and AIDS, Danny Orendorff had included like his whole queer zine, queer health library in there with some very explicit material that was not a problem. There was an embrace of the kind of value of every individual human life that supersedes, at least in this context, in Chicago, at DePaul, the other stuff. Yeah. So in our program, I've really, I think, been testing what the rhetoric is at DePaul around all of this, and it's been supported in really the social justice aspect of the community there is the dedication to that is very real. Yeah. So that's quite wonderful that, again, my sort of values and what I want to see in the world of museums is reinforced by what the institution at large wants to be putting out in the world. Yeah. So I feel very fortunate to have that alignment right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, great talk. Really cool seeing what you're working on there. I'm curious about how you engage with faculty and students in your work as you construct these kinds of programs.
So we have created what's called a faculty forum, and that is an invitation to any and all faculty who are interested in a deeper engagement with the museum and their teaching and learning and kind of getting to know us, the staff, and getting to know about our advanced exhibition schedule for planning, but also to help us understand what faculty need or want from the exhibition program. I think because we're not in art school, it's more challenging than I thought it would be to get faculty over to the museum when you have such a broad range of disciplines that are being taught at a large university, like this too, is probably similar, to sort of find those non-art specific, perhaps, modes of entry into the work, whether it's thematic, history, science, math, economics, or visual literacy, close looking, critical thinking, these sorts of things that are really part of an academic environment and training. But I will say that has been more challenging than I expected. I just didn't know. I thought I would arrive into a university setting and everyone's just like, oh yes, that would be wonderful to teach my class at the museum. But that's not always the case. So I have found that it's really more relationship building, kind of, one at a time, and learning how to best communicate with faculty in a way that they will receive the information that we're sending out. I think timing is everything too. Making sure we're not sending them information too late or too early. And also understanding that there are only going to be a finite number of faculty that will embrace using the museum in their teaching. And that's okay. I mean, we're trying to get people to use the collection because our collection is online. You can search it. We're happy to also put together a selection of works from the collection for a class. If you tell us what your theme is or your content, we can put something together for our collection study room, and you can come with your students. We're always trying to think about how else, though, to engage students. So we have 3 paid student interns, student workers in the galleries, our gallery monitors. We've had student performances. For example, the music school is quite strong at DePaul, and we have had students who are very interested in responding to our exhibitions through music. So we've had a lot of performances in that way. We also tried to launch a student advisory board. And I think we need to just rethink what its work is, and sort of listen to the students about what they want, if anything. Is there a demand or need for this leadership opportunity? Because we're very eager to hear from faculty and students. It's something that we're working more on. Our next show is called The World to Come, Art in the Age of the Anthropocene, and that is a show that the Harn Museum at University of Florida Gainesville organized. So we have that catalog already, and we sent it out to several faculty who we think would be really excited and interested in the show, but also we're inviting them to help us program. We want to use their knowledge to create the program as much as we can. And we also partner with different departments on every public program. So rather than just something being presented by DePaul Art Museum, we make sure that we're getting different units to kind of co-sponsor and work with us on programs too. Yeah, but I hope tomorrow, if anyone's joining the conversation tomorrow, that we'll have some conversation about this, how faculty and students can be more incorporated into it. I also think there's somewhat of a limit to what I can do without higher administrative sort of encouragement of people to use the museum in teaching.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, or if you think that there is a way to potentially take these ideas and translate them to a space that is maybe like an artist-run space, or working on a smaller scale in general.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. This can translate also to like writing. I think if there's an openness to looking in various places for really interesting work that feels relevant and urgent, that's really the call, is to just start looking more broadly at what's happening and give it a platform. And maybe the platform is documentary video, maybe it's a YouTube channel about artists, maybe it's writing, or maybe it is a space, an artist-run space that has a very clear vision about, what are you putting into the world, and being very, kind of transparent about that. I think I'm also calling for a little bit more transparency in how people are working and why they're doing what they're doing, like having a mission. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, you're obviously interested in diversity. I just wondered about the makeup of the DePaul University student body, and also about the breadth of the people who actually run and oversee the museum.
Mm-hmm. The student body is about 33% students of color. And the majority of that is Latinx students. So our student population, I think, this is going off the top of my head, but I think it's majority Illinois students, but then a fair amount come from out of state. We have a lot of California students, as several first generations, several commuters, several older non-traditional students. In terms of who oversees me, so I report to an associate vice president of, I think his title is External Relations and Academic Integrity, I believe. He oversees me, the library, the Institute for Global Homelessness, and special events like graduation ceremonies, I think. And then he reports to the provost. Yeah. And then I also created an advisory board. So because we're an academic art museum, we don't have a governing board. That's only the DePaul trustees are the only governing entity at DePaul. But I did want an external advisory board to sort of help us think through the work that we're doing. So I have 8 people who are from the community on the advisory board. They also approve the gifts to our collection. Yeah, we have a collection of about 3,500 objects.
So, what is the makeup of the advisory board, I guess?
Oh, sure. So the advisory board, let's see, we have someone who works external relations for Comcast. So a Latina woman, her name is Maria Castro. Our chair is a collector who's also a neuropsychologist. And a collector mostly of Chicago-based artists. We have the head of Expo Chicago, which is the big Chicago art fair. We have the head of Sotheby's Midwest. We have a local kind of Lincoln Park resident who was also a docent at another museum. We have one of the DePaul University trustees is on our board. And we have an artist on our board every year. Right now it's Rodrigo Lara. And then we have a art education faculty member who's also on the board. Yeah. Has anyone been to DePaul Art Museum? Oh, yay, that's exciting. Okay, 4 or 5. Have you all heard of it? How many of you had never heard of it until today? Oh, yeah. Okay, great. Come visit us anytime. We'd love to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you.